How's it going, everybody? This is Tom Drabo. Hope you're having another great day, and welcome back to another video. Alright, this is going to be a little bit of a difficult topic to talk about, but I'm going to be talking about when you should quit your job. Now, obviously, you have worked so hard to get the job of your dreams, only to find out that it's not exactly what you thought it was. And unfortunately, there are a lot of factors that come into play here. So I'm going to share with you the 3 times when it is most appropriate for you to leave your job when it's becoming clear that is just not going well at all. So obviously, as we all know, the big thing coming out of college is that you have to find your ultimate dream job, whether it is in the STEM category or in majors like, communication or media, or in marketing, or any of those majors that you studied in. You ultimately have to find that perfect job, and ultimately a lot of people are able to do that pretty quickly, but ultimately it all comes down to how it eventually goes. And for some people, that job ultimately does not turn out the way that they really thought it would be. And obviously there tends to be a lot of toxicity in the work environment today. There's a lot of issues that go on that are usually out of their own control, and there are just a whole bunch of other factors sometimes that really makes it very hard for those people to really be able to adapt to the environment and really work at their jobs efficiently. And because of that, that leads to a whole lot of burnout, and ultimately, that tends to be a real problem, especially those that are just entering the workforce now at a very young age. And sometimes because of that, you really just have no choice but to head out the door on your own terms. And trust me, that is very hard to do, because ultimately, it leads you to believe if you're going to have anything lined up afterwards, because obviously, you really want to make sure that you're in good hands with whatever you have going on. But ultimately, there are just times where it ultimately feels like that things have gotten so downhill at your current job that eventually you just feel like that you have to leave. But however, there are only 3 ways for you to be able to do that on your own terms without causing a real big ruckus. The first of which is ultimately because, as I mentioned before, you're just not being fairly treated. And obviously, there are a whole bunch of factors that can really go into that. Obviously, how much you're paid obviously is very important. How your colleagues treat you is important. The workload, obviously. There are so many factors into how you are able to adapt at your job that ultimately that determines whether or not you feel like that you are getting the best at the company that you are working for. Trust me, if there is one thing that most people at a young age really want to have when they enter the job of their dreams, is ultimately to have some good colleagues and really just a good amount of work, so that way they can be able to efficiently succeed at their jobs. But sometimes the companies that they work for, they can tend to be extremely toxic sometimes. There are a lot of people in management that sometimes just don't treat people very fairly, and unfortunately sometimes that just gets passed down the ladder chain as well. And so unfortunately it just becomes very hard to work in that kind of environment. And even if you're doing everything that your boss asks you to do, you're getting it to work on time, you're doing all your projects, and you're achieving so much success, they can just still completely throw you to the curb and take credit for themselves based on your own work. And sometimes that just feels disrespectful. Sometimes, you just feel like that you're being mistreated, because ultimately, while you are the one doing the work, to see your own boss literally take credit for the project for themselves instead of passing the credit to all of the people that helped them with working on it, hey, that makes you feel like that your boss is just not treating you with respect, and ultimately feels like that you're just a number. Take it from me, that's exactly what I felt like when I was at CVS and Walmart, that they're not really treating me with respect, obviously. And so sometimes, a toxic work environment overall is really the most important reason in which you should probably leave that job, because trust me, sometimes it just does not get any better. And unless any real changes are made, trust me, it is a situation in which you probably do not want to be at that particular environment for much longer. And so sometimes you just feel like that you have to drop the hammer for that reason. The second reason is the growth at your organization just stops. Obviously, your ultimate goal is to try to get some promotions and ultimately work your way up the ladder at management at your organization. But sometimes there are just so many people coming from other organizations into your organization that those positions that you really want, they end up being filled. And unfortunately, you just end up being stuck where you're at. Like ultimately, your goal is to become a manager, or ultimately a director or a VP. And ultimately, you spend the last couple years as a coordinator working hard, doing everything you can to prove to your managers that you deserve a full promotion. And yet, for some apparent reason, they end up just hiring some somebody else from another organization into the position that you want. And ultimately, there just isn't enough finances to be able to create new positions for you to be promoted to. And unfortunately, because of that, that makes you feel hurt because you really worked so hard for them. And ultimately, you deserve that promotion. And also, raises play a huge part of that as well. The more efficiently that you work, the higher your pay ultimately gets. And the same thing goes ultimately for promotions as well. Yes, I know obviously a lot of people really want to get in a job because they just love that particular environment, but hey, sometimes they just really need that pay. And unfortunately, if they are not getting those raises every year for all the hard work that they're ultimately doing, it's going to make them feel like that they're invaluable to them, that really, they just don't feel like they belong there. And unfortunately, that's going to play into a huge factor into how long they ultimately last. And that's exactly why job hopping is nowadays more popular than ever, because ultimately they feel like that their growth at the organization has come to a complete standstill, and as a result, they ultimately find a job with better pay and ultimately a higher up position that they ultimately are able to land, and so they ultimately have to leave that organization to that one so that way they can finally get what they want. And ultimately, that's another reason for you to ultimately leave that job. If you feel like that, you're not getting any more promotions, you're not getting more opportunities to really showcase why you need that promotion, sometimes it's probably just best to take all of your talents and go elsewhere and go to a place where the staff there will ultimately respect all the work that you do and ultimately give you the higher positions and pay that you want. Finally, the third and I think the most important time for you to ultimately learn when to quit your job is ultimately when you're just not having fun anymore. Ultimately, you entered your dream job thinking that it was going to be so much fun, that you're really enjoying everything, and then for some apparent reason, further down the line, the fun just stops. Whether it's the reasons that I just mentioned today, or ultimately, because of a whole bunch of other factors. For some apparent reason, you just don't feel like the job is as fun now as it was when you first started. Trust me, burnout happens quite a bit in the workforce. There is a long period of time in which employees are put under a microscope, and they're ultimately put under so much stress to get a whole lot of work done that ultimately they just falter. And as a result, it really makes the work that they do less enjoyable. And ultimately, that fun that they had at the beginning, it fades away. And trust me, those people, they just want to get into a job of their dreams because they just want to have fun and really just enjoy what they do. Sometimes it just doesn't last very long. Trust me, in order for someone to be successful at a job, you really have to enjoy it. And ultimately, that's exactly what it is with me. I'm enjoying working at where I'm at right now, and I don't have any plans on changing that anytime soon. But there are just other people that ultimately just aren't able to really have that fun that they had when they first started there. And trust me, sometimes that's why it's best to probably go find another job, because ultimately, if you're not having fun at that job that you're working at right now, then hey, what are the chances that things will ultimately go to improve at some point down the line? I mean, I'm not saying just do it like immediately. If you feel like that you have no choice but to stay at that job for as long as possible, then hey, you really need that pay. So do what you can there and ultimately try your best to succeed. But really, if it reaches the point where everything that's going on in the environment and your overall workplace feels like that, all the fun has just been completely drained away and you just feel like that you just cannot take it anymore, then yeah, it may be for the best that you go elsewhere and really just find an area where not only you feel respected but ultimately have a whole lot of fun as well. Because trust me, joy is a very important part of a job, and if you're not feeling joy at that environment, then it's not going to get any better from there. So yeah, ultimately those are the three main times in which you really should know when to quit your job. But ultimately, the main thing obviously is that you have to make sure that you have something lined up before you leave that particular job. Obviously, that's exactly what I did when I quit CVS, obviously, and the stress that I went for, I ultimately was able to take the job at Walmart, and that ultimately made it a little easier for me to be able to quit that job to take that one. Obviously, that went a little bit disastrously. However, I ultimately was also able to make my transition out of ShopRite and Lowe's to take the job at New Jersey Symphony because, like I said before, ultimately, it made it much easier for me to leave those two, particularly since I wasn't going to be there for very long anyways because they weren't a part of my major when I was going to college. But ultimately, it made it much easier for me to be able to take that job at the very end, where I still occupy today. So ultimately, what matters is if you are going to leave, make sure you at least have something something lined up before you head out there, because otherwise it's going to be that much harder for you to be able to find a job if you just quit literally right away and ultimately have nothing lined up at the other end of the tunnel. Trust me, the moment you leave the workforce without anything, it's going to become that much harder to get back in. All of us really want to have a job of our dreams ultimately, you know. We really want to have a lot of success and really just achieve at the place that we want to work at, whether, you know, it's at a media company or, you know, at a college or a school that you want to teach at, or even work in, you know, government and all that stuff. You really want to just have fun, but sometimes, you know, the fun just goes away, and ultimately, you know, you have to deal with a toxic environment, you know, a possibility that your growth at your job may stop, and unfortunately just a whole bunch of other factors that may ultimately force you to literally consider leaving that job, because ultimately your goal is to continue to work your way up the ladder, and unfortunately if those opportunities do not exist, it's going to become that much harder for you to do so. So yeah, if you're going to leave your job, it really needs to be for the right reasons. Ultimately, you know, you have to really consider all the factors in there, because if you leave just straight up without, you know, looking at everything and really seeing, you know, the bigger picture, then hey, your decision is going to look real stupid later on. So ultimately, if you feel like that you're just not having fun at your job anymore, and ultimately you just feel like that you need to start seeking elsewhere, those are the times where you really need to consider leaving the job that you currently have. Because trust me, once you have a new job lined up, things will ultimately get better again, and ultimately you'll have another opportunity to not only have fun, but really move up the ranks in doing so. Anyways, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. As always, if you'd like to see more of my content, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you know when my latest video is released. Comment below for future suggestions for my videos, whether it's blogs, practice, or challenges, you name it. Leave it in the comments below, and I'll do my best to make them. As always, follow me on my social media. All the links are in the description below. That's going to do it for this video. I hope you're having another great day. And as always, I hope to see you all again in another video very soon. So long, everybody.